Hello, welcome back once again to Entertainment ReCast, our offshoot podcast for Entertainment Rebooted, our YouTube channel / production company, if you will. This is a podcast where we usually take a topic and we discuss it for a little while, just our general thoughts, how we're noticing things going on in the entertainment industry and the world in general. And we discuss it a little bit for you and your entertainment pleasure. Today's topic, we are going to be discussing comic book to movie adaptations. Last week we talked about, or not last week, last episode, we talked about how video games are adapted into movies, how they work, how they don't work, what our general thoughts were of recent video game adaptations. I'm going to do this the entire episode again. I guarantee it. So yeah, we are going to talk about comic book adaptations, and it works out pretty well because we just went and saw recently Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is yet another MCU film. Obviously, MCU is dominating the comic book movie industry right now, but comic books have been adapted into movies since the 1940s, really. Anyway, let's get into this conversation, this discussion. DJ, what do you think works and doesn't work about comic book to movies?
That's a good question. Okay, so one of the things that you have to understand about mediums is how they're designed to be viewed. Comic books are very visual, which is similar to the way that films are. Films are a visual medium. Films are meant to be shown. Comic books kind of are popular to jump off the page, even to adults, because you can visualize a scene. And also you can show more than in a book. Whereas a book or reading, you're kind of visualizing what you're reading to yourself. Everybody has different interpretations of the way characters look, the way things work. I think that's part of the reason why book adaptations can be kind of messy, but a comic book is visual, so it goes to film really well in theory.
Right.
Because it's a visual to a visual medium. However, comic books have a lot of their own tropes and themes that they often use that don't always work well in film, especially because comic books also tend to be fairly dialogue staccato, is what I'll call it, where a character says something to stick out a phrase or a specific piece of dialogue in conversations in between action set pieces, which is similar to a film, except for comic books tend to be very tropey and very on the nose about their dialogue.
Well, that's true, but also that kind of ties into the fact that the medium itself doesn't lend to dialogue. Comic books, if they're really dialogue heavy, tend to be terrible.
Yes.
Actually, it is one of those things where you can't be very dialogue heavy when you're writing comic books. People are more interested in the art, the action set pieces, the visuals, and things like that.
That's the thing, the set pieces. So, exactly. Yeah. Comic book is still images. Mm-hmm. And so what comic books thrive at is showing as much as possible in a single page. Yep. You can read a 20-page comic. You can adapt a 20-page comic to an episode of a TV series pretty easily because, generally speaking, a lot is shown. Mm-hmm. Especially in the gold and silver age of comics, where they had a lot going on in a still, or you have a page with several individual stills broken up. An entire fight scene could take a single page, and you can understand exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. A lot can be shown that way. And when you adapt it into other mediums, such as film, it's interesting because in some ways you could depending on how you do it, you could outpace your source material. So, okay, try this particular comic book here, say, has 20 pages. Those 20 pages, you put it to film, maybe gives you 1 minute of film. But then a completely separate comic book, you could take 20 pages, and that can make an entire 3-hour film. It's entirely dependent on how much you're able to convey in that few pages and how that's done. That depends an awful lot on the writer, the artist, things like that. And to Marvel's credit, they have a very large history and robust amount of characters and stories that they can pull from and ideas to give to film without having to do that. They can cut across their entire series. And Marvel does a really good job of that, of looking at comic books and not just adapting a single story, taking elements from multiple stories and throwing it into a single one, which gives you even more material to work with. So that's kind of where it's done right. It's a very interesting dynamic going from two mediums that are similar. They seem similar, but maybe not as much as you might think.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the unique part of comic books as compared to like traditional literature and stuff like that. Comic books are in and of themselves a visual medium. It's not just a written medium. It's not just a read medium.
Correct.
In order to actually be able to appreciate a comic book in its entirety is probably about 75% the visuals.
Yep.
It's part of the reason that when people oversimplify art and things like that, it can work depending on what type of comic you're writing. Like, you don't have to be very intricate and detailed for like a web comic or a newspaper.
Yeah.
But if your art is terrible, which it honestly can be recently in like American comics and stuff like that, you're not going to be able to convey your story very well. And that's kind of an issue that people have had recently with Marvel and DC, is a lot of the artists have really started to simplify their art style.
Yep.
And the writers that they've been hiring don't understand that their comic books are a visual medium, not just a read medium. And
they've become very dialogue heavy. They're not showing as much. They're not using the images. They're doing much smaller individual action panes rather than... one of the things that used to be very common in comic books was a full featured panel.
Where, the splash page.
Yeah, you'd have that every few pages. You'd have just one image that would sell an entire theme. Like one might be Ultron with his army, and it's just him standing in front of his army, and it's like it'd be like at the Lord of the Rings films when Saruman is standing in front of the orcs and giving his speech. That's an intense moment. You just see the scope of the army. You can do that in a single page.
Yeah.
And that's what comic books can thrive at. But yeah, you're right. If you're not doing that, not using that art to its fullest, it can backfire greatly. And what you end up doing is doing yourself a disservice and not relying on the medium that is what your art is.
Yeah.
That would be like making a film and making it all about the soundtrack.
Yeah.
Like the sound, you're not going to the film to listen to a soundtrack. Soundtracks are great, but the point is the visual medium. If you're focusing too heavy on the music and your movie's not great, it's not going to do well. Like, I could have just listened to this music out of context and gotten an emotional satisfaction out of it, but now I'm watching a movie against this great soundtrack that is actually better than what I'm watching. Why am I here?
Yeah. Like, the interesting thing about comics and film is you have to understand what type of medium you're dealing with.
Yes.
And the problem is that really bad films have the same issues that comic books have. And I think that's part of the reason that they work very well. Like adapting comic books to film works very well because they are actually very similar. A lot of movie making, like great movie making, has to have great cinematography. It's a visual medium. You know? Like, consider this. Like, movies have been around since the 1800s.
Right.
They didn't even have sound in them regularly until the 30s, 40s.
Right. Pure visual.
It was a pure visual medium. It was about the action that the actor was taking, the interaction that people were having, and the emotion that was being drawn out by the person's face.
There's a theory in film that goes like this. A good film you can watch without any sound and follow what's happening.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that is, I believe in that full-heartedly. You can rely a little bit on dialogue. That's not a crutch. You just don't want it to be the focus of your film. The film should be visual because that's the point. Otherwise, why have it in film? If you're just going to tell everybody what's going on, this is part of the problem we've nitpicked in some of the films that we've watched for other channels, is they're very dialogue exposition heavy. They're telling us what's happening. Sometimes they're showing it and telling it, which is unnecessary and redundant. Sometimes they're telling it and not showing it, which is boring. You have a film, show us. Show us what's happening. Some of the best features of character development when it comes to dialogue is when they actually don't speak. It's unspoken dialogue. When their facial expressions, their emotions show what they're thinking. I've actually seen a lot of directors and other people actually tell actors to think certain thoughts when they're having dialogue with the people, so that in between their actual spoken words, they're saying stuff in their head, so it gets them in the right mood to what their face. Because your face and your body language will do its thing naturally. You don't have to force it. If you just if you're saying the right things in your head or something internally, like you could be saying something like in your head, you could say, "I really love this person," and then you're gonna show love on your face, rather than trying to fake it. That's the kind you can have whole scenes of really powerful emotion, set pieces without any spoken dialogue, and do a really good job with that.
Well, I mean, consider like some of the greatest film, like one of the greatest film shots ever. All right, like I will fight people on this. One of the greatest shots put to film is in Star Wars: A New Hope. When Luke Skywalker walks out of the house when he's just been told that he's not able to go to the academy again until the next harvest.
And he just looks out
looks out at the binary suns. That entire thing, not a single word is spoken. He's not saying a single thing. We're not hearing a single thing.
But you know exactly what he's feeling.
We know exactly what he's feeling. We know the conflict. We can tell in his, that he's going through this mental battle, and we're just being swept away by the music.
Exactly.
That is one of the greatest shots of film. Consider our favorite part of Dracula 1931. The mental battle between Dracula and Van Helsing. Not spoken.
Yep.
Entirely visual.
There's very little dialogue in that entire exchange. And in the part where they're having their battle, it's not spoken at all.
Nope.
It's all shown, and then Dracula says, "Your will is very strong." He wouldn't even have had to say that, and you could have figured out what's going on. Now, I do know why they say that, because they're trying to bring you back into the dialogue. It's a transitionary statement.
It's moving the battle from the mind to the
back
spoke.
into reality. Yeah. Exactly, back into spoken word, which works. But you don't need that part up to that point, because holy crap, you get a lot out of it from just that scene. And comic books to films, I think, do really well when they follow that same ideology, when they very visual mediums. One of my favorite examples actually is, I was thinking, but the first Avengers film, where there's an entire battle, on the helicarrier between Hulk and everybody else. There's this moment when the fighting, all that happens, and it's kind of over, and you see Black Widow like get behind a corner and just breathing heavily. She's just like, holy freaking crap, no dialogue. None. No dialogue in that whole scene of her. You just know that she's like, I almost died. Like, that was intense. Like, I was not ready for that. Like,
Black Widow actually is a great example just in that entire film, if you think about it. The first time we're introduced to Black Widow, when she's doing her interrogation, or she's being interrogated by the Russians.
Yes. And
she's literally just talking. Almost all of the dialogue and the personality and stuff just comes out of non-spoken actions.
In fact, she's saying stuff, but acting a little differently than what she's saying. It's actually pretty well done. There's the comic books. Another issue with comic books, though, in general, too, besides the lack of video mini issues, is the tropiness of them.
That's fair.
A lot, especially in the silver and golden age of comics, there is a lot of silliness, like in the outfits, the uniforms, the portrayal. But in comic books, it works because comic books use harsh colors to differentiate. They use they make characters stand out strong.
Right.
In live action, that often can be very jarring when you see people like Wolverine. Everyone's like, didn't wear yellow spandex in his films. Well, that would have been kind of weird in a live action setting.
Well, yeah, because the thing is that comics, especially like older comics and stuff like that, used really bold colors to differentiate their characters on the screen. Mm-hmm. Not the screen, sorry. The panel. Page. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you're dealing with the X-Men, for instance, and they're fighting a bunch of bad guys and stuff like that, you put them in yellow so that they're easier to distinguish on the page.
That is correct.
So when they're in a massive fight sequence and stuff like that, you can literally be like, oh, you know that yellow blob right there? That's Wolverine. You know, or that blue blob with the yellow stripes a certain way.
Extreme zoomed out shot of the characters and get a ton of them in there, and you know who's who because they're color coded. They're easy to stand out. In live action, what differentiates characters strongly is their individual personalities. In comics, there's no spoken dialogue. There's no body language is limited to a single shot. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be profound in those shots. And so a lot of what distinguishes characters is the specific actions that they take, and the few dialogue, when it's done well, is strong and sets the character apart. In film, you can actually give characters a lot more depth to them. And because of that, they feel more real. And because of that as well, simple tropes that would work in comics because everything's simplified. The good versus evil, everything is like super simplified a lot of times. Not always, and sometimes they will complicate things as well. Mm-hmm. But even that sometimes flops in comics because it's hard to take that seriously when you've got characters in silly spandex uniforms trying to do serious talking points. It's hard to take seriously because, hey, just punch the dude. That's what you're here to do.
Well, yeah, and the other thing, too, is like going into like from comic books to medium, going from the page to the film. You have to establish the entire world to accept and normalize what's going on in a comic. Very easy to do in a comic. You draw New York a certain way and people interact a certain way and things like that. So like the universe of Spider-Man, it's not unusual for people to be running around in spandex in New York because that's where so many of the characters are based. Gotham City it's not weird to see a guy in a bat suit, like a man dressed up like a bat, because literally all the criminals are eccentric.
Correct.
So everybody in that town has a certain eccentricness to them.
Yep.
I think that's part of the reason that movies like 1989's Batman work really well, because the entire film, it looks like Batman.
Yeah, the entire film is gothic. It doesn't actually even feel like a real place. It feels like a comic book.
Yeah.
And it does a really good job with it. And I will actually make the argument, too, even though it was very panned, and there are a lot of issues with it, is Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, which had a lot of issues with some of the silliness, like the Bat credit card things and stuff like Batman and Robin being goofy and stuff. But at the same time, it feels like a silly comic book world.
That's true.
And it feels a lot more like the '60s Batman. Like
exactly.
It's almost a parody of itself.
Yeah.
And in film, that can be very jarring. And that's part of the reason why those movies felt so jarring. Because this is silly, but if that had been a comic book, people would have just kind of laughed it off and probably given it a lot more leeway.
I mean, to a point, to an extent. I think that the problem also with Batman and Robin and Batman Forever and stuff like that is it deviated from the other Batman films that had come out recently, but it also was alien to the comics tone at the time of the release.
Well, that is a good point.
So you were taking comics all the way back to the 60s when DC and Marvel and everybody had evolved. Like, comic books evolve continuously. They don't age well, is the other thing, too.
That is true.
They have great stories and things like that, but if you're going to try to set it in, like, a modern society, modern place, if you're not going to spend the time to, like, develop... So, like, one issue that's easy but hard about comic books is you already have a visual for the story.
Right.
So that's easy because you can literally be like, okay, I have a story, I have a great character, I have a great environment. I just need to put that on the screen. But the issue with that is that sometimes it's really hard to put that on a screen.
Or you do put it on the screen exactly like it is, and it looks jarring, and you can't figure out why.
Or it looks too unreal.
Yeah, that's unrealistic is actually generally what you get. So, in that vein too, we talked all about already, kind of, why is it that, with all this in mind, why does Marvel tend to do a better job than DC?
Marvel's world is more based on our world. And they're also character-driven stories. You can put the characters literally anywhere, and it works. We've talked about this before.
Yep.
You can literally take Spider-Man, as long as... It's kind of like Sonic. Like from going to our last podcast. Sonic, because of how vague his backstory and everything is, as long as the character looks like, acts like, sounds like, moves like, interacts with the world like Sonic...
You can put him in any...
You can put him anywhere. Same thing with any of the Marvel heroes. Like, Marvel heroes make sense almost anywhere because their entire story arcs, their villains, everything is based and centered around the character. That's why people love Spider-Man so much. Spider-Man's stories are half Spider-Man, half Peter Parker.
Yes.
Like, that's just the formula for a Spider-Man film. Or not a film, a comic.
Too, because of the comics, yeah. Actually, the Sam Raimi's trilogy shows that really strongly.
Yes.
Whereas, like, the Peter Parker and Spider-Man are basically, like, in the movie as much as each other, and they're both very important to his character. And that's continued in every other version. Into the Spider-Verse did it. That was actually, I think, part of the issue people had with some of the Spider-Man, the two that were done with
Andrew Garfield?
Yeah, Andrew Garfield, was that Peter Parker's in that one didn't feel like a real person. He almost felt like a superhuman version of himself. But in all of the Spider-Man films, all the way up into the ones done in the MCU, Peter Parker is integral to the character.
Yeah.
You can't have Spider-Man with Peter Parker and vice versa. And they do the same with the other Spider-Man characters. There's a whole Spider-Verse for Spider-Man, and they're all like this. Even the more obscure ones. Like, Miles Morales is Spider-Man. Miles Morales is as much a Spider-Man story in Spider-Man Miles Morales as Spider-Man as well. Mm-hmm. His home situation, his structure, and what he goes through in a daily life is very integral to his character. You can kind of put him anywhere.
Yeah.
And make it work. His origin the character's origin matters, and sometimes where they come from, but you can airdrop them anywhere, and they're going to be that character. Whereas, like, Batman outside of Gotham is a completely different character than Batman in Gotham.
Well, yeah, I mean, even think about, like, Batman between Batman and the Justice League.
Yep.
Even, like, you don't have to have read the comics and stuff like that. If you've watched the cartoons when we were kids, so Batman the Animated Series and then the Justice
Batman,
League
Superman,
cartoon.
Yeah, the Justice League Animated Series.
The
DC Animated Universe, amazing.
Like, if you think about it, though, that played by the same actor, like, they're both Kevin Conroy, greatest Batman of all time.
I can
animated Batman of all time. When you read comic books and Batman has dialogue, that's what he sounds like.
That's fair.
That's
fair.
That's how you know him. But anyway,
to the point when they had a live action Bruce Wayne show up in the CW universe, guess who played him?
Exactly. But anyway, so going back, the cartoon, Batman the Animated Series, absolutely very iconic, great story, great everything like that. The Justice League comic, very different Batman.
Yes.
Same actor, they sound the same, they look very similar. And all these different things. But just because of how outside of Gotham Batman is in the Justice League, he comes off as almost an entirely different character.
Yes.
Batman belongs in Gotham. And the other thing, too, is other heroes don't belong in Gotham. It's very hard to put another hero in Gotham. Superman's taken over.
The Rogues Gallery are as much of the character, and the location of the Rogues Gallery are as much as the character. They invented whole new cities that were already, like, Metropolis is Superman is Metropolis.
Yeah.
Batman is Gotham. Flash is Central City. I think it's Blue Beetle is Coast City. Like, they all have their own city that they operate in, and they have their own way of doing things.
Yeah, and the aesthetic of the city and the way that the city operates and things like that are so integral to the characters that you can remove the characters, but you feel like you're missing something big from those characters.
Exactly.
They work really well as a team. The Justice League is a very powerful... Like, when the Justice League gets together, you're like, those are like the most powerful heroes. It makes sense that they would work together. It makes sense that they would want to be friends and they would want to operate together. But sometimes you're just like, but why are they? Why are they operating together?
In fact, a lot of the times when they put DC heroes together, it feels mishmashy.
Unless they're from the same city.
Exactly. Or they're the same type of hero.
Yeah.
Like Green Arrow and Batman can often work together there because they're gadget based, but even then Green Arrow is far more he's more like an optimistic. Oh my goodness, he's an optimistic Batman. Like he's more he's just an optimistic Batman, and so that still grades them against each other. So many DC heroes, right? Marvel's Avengers and their other team groups feel more fluid because the characters are the central focus. So when they put them in any situation, you just airdrop any group of Marvel heroes into any city, and they can just operate there.
Yep.
You do that with the Justice League, and it just doesn't feel the same.
It really doesn't. Like I said,
Justice League literally feels like it's only designed to take on large threats that they have to get together for.
Right.
And then when they're taking on any other villain, it's just they're better off on their own.
Exactly. And even when they fight large threats and stuff like that, like think about like the Injustice Society.
Oh, yeah.
Or not the Injustice. Well,
I'm
thinking the Legion of Doom.
Oh, you're thinking. You're not thinking of the reversed bad.
Yeah, I'm not thinking about the.
You're talking about the Legion of Doom. Okay, yeah, Legion of Doom.
So Legion of Doom, when they face off against the Legion of Doom, it's all of the biggest bad guys in each of the individual characters' rogues gallery, all combined together to do an evil plot.
Right.
Whenever they fight, they are the exact same amount of heroes to the exact same amount of villains, and they usually fight their counterpart.
That is true.
Batman always fights against the Joker. Superman always fights against Lex Luthor. And
actually, in a lot of the stories of DC, where there's alternate universes where the Justice League goes bad, it's often when they cross characters. Mm-hmm. Like the Injustice version of Superman, who kills Joker because Joker kills Lois Lane.
Yeah,
Joker crosses into his world and he instantly just kills him and goes evil.
Yeah, because he can't handle the cross.
Right.
Because the thing is that Batman can handle the Joker because Batman is a very, very dark superhero.
Yeah.
Superman is too much of a goody two shoes to handle something like the Joker.
He's very optimistic. Another one is the Syndicate, which is another dark version of the Justice League, where you have Ultraman, Superman is Ultraman, Wonder Woman is Superwoman, you know, the Owlman and all this different stuff. Those guys were literally just, what if the Justice League heroes were just villains, like just regular everyday villains, and they're terrifying as villains because they have all the same powers, the same motivations. Their motivations don't even change.
Yeah,
like they just. It's just like the extreme version of them.
Right.
It's just like these characters, whereas in Marvel, these characters, their personalities are so intricate that if you get a character wrong on screen, people get upset.
Absolutely.
You can flip a DC character 180 and people will be like, that's fine, as long as like their backstory is the same. It's like, oh, Superman's still a Kryptonian. He's evil in this version, but he's still a Kryptonian. That's all we care about. Like, it's the story. It's always the story. Yeah. Marvel's actually struggled a lot of times to make compelling villains out of heroes because those characters are so intricate to us that when they do it, it doesn't feel as real. Whereas DC, it just feels easier to flip characters around and make them evil. There are examples. Maestro, who is an evil version of Hulk from an alternate future, is one of the most terrifying villains in Marvel history. But they do it by making him a different character. He might as well not be Hulk. He's a completely unique character to Hulk. He's just a future evil version of him.
Yeah.
It doesn't work because it doesn't have the same feel as like evil Superman. Like, oh, I can actually see Superman going evil because he's a product of his circumstances. It feels like everyone in DC, it's DC and Marvel feels like the nature versus nurture argument.
Okay, go on.
So DC is nurture. Every hero in DC and every villain is like a product of their circumstances. Their circumstances determined who they were. Whereas in Marvel, it's nature. They're either good or they're bad, and they stick to their gut regardless of what happens. There are outliers to that in both sets, but the mainstream characters, Batman is Batman because his parents were killed in the way they were killed, and that made him want to take out justice the way he does.
That's fair.
Green Arrow was left on an island alone for a long period of time. And that made him more like a castaway, where he became like, he talks to himself all the time. He's very reclusive. That literally a product of his circumstances. He was a complete jerk before that happened.
Well, it's also the circumstances.
Batman was a spoiled brat that turned into like a hardline character. Martian Manhunter getting stranded on Earth for a long period of time made him become more sympathetic to the human plight. Red Tornado, his AI becoming more becoming more real and human, made him think and differentiate. Whereas his other family who stay villains is because they still have their programming in place. It's not because they chose to be villains. It's because their programming is still in place. All of the entire Batman and Rogues galaxy are like chemically altered people with doctorate degrees. Like they all have university education. All of them. They all have medical degrees, doctorates, multiple master's degrees. All of them are very intelligent people, but they get like chemically altered or have a psychological disorder that ruins them. It's like it's literally they're all a product of their circumstances.
They're a product of their circumstances and stuff like
Whereas
that. But
Marvel's
they're also a product
choice.
of their raising. So this is another thing too. So like flip the coin a little bit. I think that it's also the other way around. A lot of the characters in Marvel are good because they are good.
Yes.
That is what they are.
Yeah,
so their nature is good.
Yeah.
DC, it's the nurture effect. It's who they're raised by that defines them. And of course, you said that there's outliers. Like, for instance, the reason that Spider-Man is a good guy is entirely because he was raised by Aunt May and Uncle Ben to be a good person. And when the circumstance comes about and Uncle Ben dies, with great power comes great responsibility. He can't be a bad guy because of his circumstance. Because of what he was raised by.
That's what I think makes Spider-Man so unique in the Marvel Universe, specifically, is because a lot of other characters, like a lot of the X-Men, for example, it never really explains why they're good.
They're just good.
They're just good.
Yeah, Wolverine does not make sense as a hero if you think about it, if you don't have him just be good.
Yeah. The ones that choose Xavier and the ones that choose Magneto, the good versus bad thing is just they just are who they are. Mm-hmm. Peter is actually a far more interesting character in that universe because he chose wrong first and paid the price for it and had to learn. Whereas like all the other heroes are just good because they always have been good and that's just how they are.
But consider this too. Spider-Man's an outlier. Spider-Man is the most popular character in Marvel.
That's correct.
He was the face of Marvel for a very, very long time and continues to deserve to be the face of Marvel. The reason Captain Marvel is the face of Marvel Comics anymore is entirely politically driven, and I don't like it. Spider-Man is their greatest character.
They've been trying to make Captain Marvel, the Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, the flagship of Marvel for like 2 decades. And they keep trying to do it in the comics. They keep trying to do it in the video games. Keep trying to do it in television shows. The problem is she's just a bad character. She's a jerk. She's cruel and she's unnecessarily obtuse. Honestly,
she would make a great villain.
Yeah, she literally was going to murder Miles Morales in cold blood because he might kill Captain America in the future, according to the possible predictions of an Inhuman.
Yeah.
She went all Minority Report on the Marvel Universe and didn't even hesitate. Just started killing everybody. Like, she's not a great character. That's not the first time. Like, she she nearly killed Rogue, and she was going to kill Rogue, and Rogue held on to her because there's a whole thing in the comics, and they've adapted this it's actually been adapted quite well, where Rogue was commanded by Mystique to take down Captain Marvel, or well, at the time I think she was actually the Miss Marvel, but it was Carol Danvers. Mm-hmm. And she held on too long and ended up putting her in her coat and holding her powers. But the reason she holds on too long is because Carol tries to kill her. So it actually turned into self-defense very quickly. So it was she's a very terrible character, except for a few instances. She was actually pretty decent in the Lego games. Mm-hmm. She was okay, and she was all right in the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes TV series that was prematurely cut short simply because they came out with the Avengers film and they wanted a series that was closer resembled that. Yeah. So, and that's another issue with all of this, is that if industries keep wanting to push unpopular characters because they like them, it doesn't matter how badly you try to shove these characters down our throats, we don't like them. And the thing is, every time they make them, they have a chance to make them better, and they don't. They just continue to make them bad. The film version of Captain Marvel was also she was bland. Didn't grow, didn't really struggle very much. There wasn't really any growth in that film. She starts and ends the film actually worse than she started it, because the whole theme of the film was actually, I was right all along and everybody else was wrong, and I can just be a jerk and that's okay. Like, right. That's what? No, it's stupid.
It's just not. It's not a good moral. And the thing too is, like, considering going back to our original discussion, stuff like that, going to specifically film adaptations, there's certain characters I think that lend really, really well to film because they lend really well to stories.
Yes.
Spider-Man is probably like one of my favorite superheroes of all time. Like, if you've seen our recording studio set, all the figures are mine.
Yes.
they are dominated by Spider-Man and Batman. They're like my favorite characters. Anyway, Spider-Man is a great character. He fits into a great story. You can make amazing movies based off of Spider-Man as a character.
I think that actually takes back to the idea of them being the outliers. Who are the two outliers in their comics? Batman and Spider-Man. Yeah. Batman is good because he's good. He has no reason to be a good guy. He's given every reason to be a horrible person. His backstory, everything he's gone through, everything that has made him what he is, could easily make him a villain. He's good because he's good.
He's good because he's good, and he was raised by Alfred.
Yeah, he's nature and nurture. Mm-hmm. Spider-Man is nature and nurture, where every other character around them in their universe is one or the other.
Well, I mean, Superman to an extent is also nature and nurture. He was raised in if he hadn't have been raised in Kansas,
not by canon, because anytime Superman is raised by anyone other than them, he becomes a villain.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is everybody in DC is nurture, and everybody in Marvel is nature. Every Marvel is just good because they're good, and everybody in DC is good because of their circumstances. Because anytime their circumstances change in DC, they change their character completely.
Yeah.
Every alternate version of a DC character is just them raised a different way, completely changes their character. Whereas in Marvel, no matter how you raise certain characters, they're always every version of Spider-Man throughout the entire multiverse is a good character, regardless of what horrible things are done to them.
That's actually a good point, because even consider this, like one of my favorite comic series of all time, Superior Spider-Man. It's the mind of Doc Ock in Spider-Man's body.
Yes.
But because Peter Parker's conscience is still there, he slowly turns Doc Ock into a good guy.
Yes.
Because of who Peter Parker is as a person.
Yes.
Like,
their nature is just powerful.
Yeah.
But Spider-Man gets a little bit more nurture and backstory in that. Mm-hmm. Batman gets a little more nature in his. Because in every version of Batman, even in, like, who's the one that's the outlier in the Injustice universe?
Batman.
He's still the good guy.
Yeah.
He almost goes along, but he pulls back. In fact, in order to make him a villain in the universe with the crime syndicate, it's not even him. It's his older brother. is Owlman and kills him, and that's becomes Owlman.
Oh.
Huh. It's not Bruce Wayne. It's a different Wayne. In order to make him a villain, they have to make him a different person because Bruce Wayne is always a good guy.
That's a good point, actually. Now that I think about
it, those two characters are the outliers, and that's why I think because if Green Arrow doesn't end up on the island, he ends up a horrible person.
That's true. He ends up a terrible, selfish playboy, and his family leans into that. His family allows it to happen.
Yeah,
his dad wasn't happy about it.
Plenty of versions of Blue Beetle where he gets the suit and goes evil.
That's true.
It's just
he has to have his family.
He has his family. With Shazam, the people around him help drive him to be who he is.
It's true. He's a very, very selfish character, especially in the movie.
That's another point. A lot of the DC heroes are actually kind of jerks that have had circumstances force them into a good-natured ability. Whereas everyone in Marvel is just good because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Captain America is good because he's good. All of these people are good because they're good, which is also why the anti-hero in Marvel's the anti-heroes in Marvel are so interesting because they're not just good because it's good. They think they have a different way of thinking than it's just good. Because the mainline heroes are always good. And like every version of them, like in any multiverse you go, they're always good. Whereas you have the anti-heroes, the villains, they are the ones that adjust. Like there is a universe in Marvel Universe where all of the heroes are the villains and the villains are the heroes. But a lot of them, they're not even the same characters.
Well, yeah, they really
Iron Man isn't Tony Stark. He's some other guy entirely. That's like I think it actually is his rival becomes Iron Man, and he's a villain. It's different characters take on their names, and that's how they make them the villains. It's really hard, like we've talked about. Marvel is character driven. It's really hard to make those characters bad guys because they're endeared to us so strongly.
Yeah.
Whereas in DC, the environment around them is as much a part of the character as the character themselves.
Yeah, if you put the character in a different city, they always turn into something different.
That is correct.
They've done that. They've done that multiple times with a bunch of their different characters.
Like they had one where Superman lands in Gotham instead of landing in Smallville. Smallville, he lands in Gotham. Mm-hmm. And he becomes like a Batman-like character. Like he's just like kind of broken and stuff. And he's like killing all the villains because he's just like, this place is horrible. What is this nightmare dystopia?
Yeah.
And Batman ends up in Metropolis and he ends up like a much cleaner hero because the cities themselves affect the people. It's just such a different dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think that's why team sports are hard to make a film. I think that's why the DC universe fails so much where the Marvel universe succeeds. The Marvel universe can just throw any characters in any situation and make it work.
And they can throw them together.
Yep.
Because it's character. As long as the characters are accurately represented and they do a good job and they give each of them an equal amount of screen time, roughly, you have a successful film.
Yep.
That's why Captain America Civil War works and so does Avengers and so do all these other things is because you give the characters put together.
Even the worst Marvel film is still pretty good. Like the ones that even people don't like are still pretty good because the characters are interesting. In fact, where Marvel started to fall apart is when they started messing with the characters.
Mm-hmm.
The first two Ant-Man films, Ant-Man is a small fry in a big universe, and the first one is a heist film. The second one is like a spy film.
Yeah,
and that works really well. The third one tries to do the huge Avengers thing, which could have still worked. But the stakes don't feel as real in that.
Well, the other thing is that a lot of the Marvel... The problem that Marvel's facing is they've run out of big stories. Marvel is not story-driven, it's character-driven. And as a result, Marvel only has so many major, impressive, well-known, amazing stories. Like, think about it.
After the MCU has done a lot of original stories. Yeah. The first Ant-Man film is 100% original.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, but what I'm saying is like that's part of the reason Marvel works, and part of the reason that Marvel is starting to go downhill. Like you can't deny it. MCU's not as good as it was.
Yeah, that's
like.
Correct.
Don't get me wrong. I love the Marvel movies and stuff like that.
From a Batman film, you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. When you're around long enough, you start to get complacent and you start to lose sight of what you are.
Yeah.
And they don't have any really strong competition from anyone else, so they can just keep making whatever they want. And honestly, I'm okay with that. They don't all have to be great. I actually don't expect every single Marvel film to be amazing. I just expect them to be decent.
Well,
and
so
the problem is they've had films that weren't great. Like the second Iron Man film is a weak villain. It's okay. The really big villain in that film is himself. The third Iron Man film kind of flops a little bit at the end, but it's okay. They're all okay. There's a lot of okay ones. The second Thor film is okay. The problem with some of the newer ones is that they take some weird directions and they don't away from the characters. Thor's character has changed a lot from the first one, and Thor Ragnarok, Thor was a lot more jokier, less serious. It makes sense because he's lost so many people. He's been around his team members more, so he's kind of camaraderie about them a bit more. But Love and Thunder, actually my least favorite part of that film was actually Thor. I actually liked the Lady Thor better. Like, she was a more convincing character because she actually felt like her character had more development than his. His character, he felt like he was falling back and behind again. Like he just keeps, they keep reusing the same, I'm just trying to find myself. We've been trying to find yourself for like 4 films. Like, let's get somewhere with this.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is, like, the character is great. You can put the characters in almost anything. In fact, I think the MCU succeeds the most when they put the characters that we like in new stories and stuff like that. Like,
yes,
all the Spider-Man films are really great. But that's because Spider-Man's just a great character. You can put him in almost any... Like, I don't think any of the Marvel MCU Spider-Man movies have comic counterparts.
No.
It's not from a comic.
No.
They they take references and they take shots.
I mean, the way they do the Vulture is completely unique from the comics.
Yeah, absolutely unique.
Where it's stealing alien tech from the Avengers War that was also original. Mm-hmm. The alien race that attacks Earth is original to the films. It came into the comics later, but it's original to the film.
Yeah.
That entire alien race that Thanos uses. Thanos' entire motives are different.
Yeah.
He has more altruistic motives. He's an idiot in his actual execution, but his motives are more pure. Whereas in the comics, he's just... that's another thing about comic books to film that is interesting, is villains. Yeah. In a lot of comic books, villains just want to take over the world or have like this really megalomaniacal goal. Whereas a lot of the villains in the films have more reasonable goals. Like Killmonger in Black Panther. I just want to fix the mistakes where our people just stood here and did nothing for eternity. Mm-hmm. I just want to do something about it. He just took it extremely aggressive. Like, hey, everything that they did wrong, let's just do that but worse. Like, mm-hmm. Okay, you're taking this logic to its extreme. That makes sense. You had villains like... Ultron, which is just humans are terrible. The only way we're going to improve them is forced evolution. We need to make them better, and the best way to make them better is by disaster, which is actually a comic book point that both Ultron and Apocalypse from DC have done, which is this idea that to make people better, we just give them disaster. Only the strongest will make it through. Like, not Apocalypse, sorry, Darkseid. I was thinking Apocalypse is Marvel. Yeah. Darkseid from DC does that whole thing where we'll just make people suffer and the stronger ones will come out of it better soldiers for it. Apocalypse from Marvel is all the strongest will survive, so he creates natural disasters and stuff to kill people off and force people to be better and fight each other to the death. These villains... when you adapt them to film, they don't always work when it's just... Like, Doctor Doom will be an interesting one. I'm really curious to see how they adapt him because his motivations, he's actually the closest to Lex Luthor that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has. He thinks he's the good guy. Lex Luthor thinks he's the good guy. He thinks that he's protecting the Earth by getting rid of the heroes because the humans need to stand on their own and they need to... Because they're too reliant on the heroes and aliens and other people. We need to be self-sufficient and better, and we need to just do our own thing. And he's a little megalomaniacal in all of that.
Right.
Whereas Doctor Doom is the same way. He has the same ideals that we can do better by just making ourselves better. He has no natural abilities or talents or powers. Everything he has, he earned. He learned magic and mastered magic so that he could use it. He mastered technology. He created himself a technical suit and mastered magic and these ideas to be a better, a stronger fighter. He earned everything that he has, and he believes everyone else should have to do the same. Yeah. And that would be a good adaptation to film. Whereas so many of these other villains are just, I shall take over the world. That doesn't work. And Marvel's done a pretty good job of giving them unique motivations.
That's fair. And I think that those are the best types of villains and stuff. Like, not just the ones that just I want to take over the world and I want to do these things. Like, for instance, Guardians of the Galaxy, the newest film that came out. That's a great villain. His motivations are entirely unique.
He actually even says that. There's that monologue where he's like, he's talking about, I don't want to just take over the world. I just want to make it better. Yeah. And then Rocket makes a
great counterpoint.
It's
his like counterpoint's great.
He didn't want to make things better. He just didn't like them the way that they are, which is true, because what does he even consider perfection? Because he keeps destroying it, because he keeps destroying his own creations, because
it keeps falling into the same
patterns.
Everything else.
People have choice and agency, and he hates it. And he wants to. It's like you just hate things being natural, so you try to improve them. And the High Evolutionary in the comics is very similar to that. The High Evolutionary in the comics believes that every being needs to be improved. And him and Mr. Sinister actually have a very similar ideology in that. Mr. Sinister being an X-Men villain who I think has yet to be adapted into live-action film that I know of. I can't think of a single example.
No, he's been in comics. Or not comics. Duh, he's been in comics. He's been in video games.
Video games. He's been in some television shows based off of the properties. He was a very strong character in the original X-Men animated series from the 90s. He was in that quite frequently, and he is a very underused villain. A lot of times he's used as just like a minion to Apocalypse, but he in his own right is a very terrifying villain. He is very similar to the High Evolutionary, where he's just trying to modify people to improve them, and he's just a little more sinister in his experiments. And they took some cues from him in the film version of High Evolutionary. The High Evolutionary in the comics was not as megalomaniacal. He was more stoic and just had a very straightforward purpose, whereas Mr. Sinister was very much like rip people apart, put them back together kind of thing. So they kind of combined those two characters into one, and it was a very interesting and a fun take on the villain. That's a great way to do it. You don't have to take a comic villain or a hero and put them on the screen exactly the same. Their characters and ideas should be similar, but one of the things Marvel has done is hybrid characters. They will take multiple Marvel characters and mix them into single characters, or take traits from other ones and put them into other ones. Especially when they didn't have rights to certain ones, they would remake other characters into those characters to make it work. They do a decent job of that, of pulling them to the screen.
Yeah, Marvel, like, moving on to, like, I guess our next little brief thing, Marvel versus DC, obviously. Translating a lot better,
especially with the DC cinematic universe in general just falling apart.
Yeah, so why do you think that MCU succeeds so well, DCEU does not? I have my own thoughts about it, but what are your thoughts?
The main thought to me is literally the way that you put them together. Marvel did an excellent job of taking characters that were lesser known and putting them on the screen. We all know Spider-Man. They didn't have the rights to Spider-Man, you know. They had to take characters that were they didn't have the rights to Hulk. They didn't have the rights to X-Men. Characters that have been very popular based off of animated series that have been done. Comics have been done. They were very popular. They didn't have the rights to any of those. So they had to take lesser known characters. Well, the first one they decided to do was Iron Man. People might have heard of Iron Man, but I mean, I knew who Iron Man was, and I knew a lot about the comics at that time. I knew Iron Man, I knew Captain America, I knew Falcon, and a lot of these more obscure characters. I was aware of these characters, but the mainstream audiences had no idea who these people were. So they could do whatever they want. Iron Man is a very interesting character because he is another outlier in the Marvel universe. Spider-Man's not the only one. There are others. I kind of joke a little bit about the nature versus nurture, but in general, the universe feels that way. Mm-hmm. But Iron Man is another character who starts out a complete jerk.
Yeah.
And an experience changes him and makes him rethink his entire life. He had a rough upbringing. He was treated poorly. He's an alcoholic. He's not a really good dude, but he decides to be a hero because out of necessity and out of like an altruism he learns based off of experience. Mm-hmm. And it forces him to rethink his life. It's a very interesting character. And they did a really good job of putting it to film and giving an original spin on it.
Right.
Something that hadn't really been done. They always just done what have they always made films of? The flagship characters. Marvel literally made a film out of an obscure character out of necessity, and it worked.
Yeah.
And they stuck to that. And it's funny because every time they do it, people make fun of Marvel. Oh, you're going to take this weird, obscure character we've never heard of and turn him into things? Well, but, not like Iron Man. It's like, that's what they did with Iron Man.
Yeah, but that's the genius part about the MCU. So, to squeeze in here, MCU, I think part of the reason that they succeed so much is because they take the obscure character.
Yes.
Because you're not going to have a lot of people being the purists about the obscure character.
Yes.
And so you have a little bit more wiggle room. You can kind of change them a little bit. You can make them into different molds and stuff like that, which makes them entertaining for the entire broad audience.
But they still kept them comic book accurate.
They keep them as comic book accurate as necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah, not as possible, as necessary.
Yes.
To make sure that it's still the same character. That's why they work really well. And the thing is that MCU continues to do this. Like Riri Williams. Not the greatest character in the Black Panther movie and things like that. But if you really think about it, she is much better than she was in the comics.
She's garbage in the comics.
Yeah, the comics, she's terrible.
There's a whole theme when she's a kid where she's like yelling at her teacher because she won't call her out for being bad. Like, tell me I can't do things so that I can overcome you, but you can be anything you want. No, you're supposed to tell me.
And
dumb.
She's just a bad character. She's written really poorly. In the comics, she makes a better villain.
Such an interesting take on Iron Man, but a poor character. But the film version of her was way more entertaining.
The film version of her has a lot of issues. Don't get me wrong. Not a great character just overall, but they took a already pretty bad character, made her at least different and interesting enough.
The way I see it is they took a character that was unbearable and made her bearable.
Yeah, barely bearable.
But that's the point.
That's just my personal thing. I didn't really enjoy her character in...
I actually didn't mind her. So I actually thought she was pretty good, but maybe that's because the comic rubbed me so hard. Now, I had the opposite thing with America Chavez. Okay. I like the comic book version of her a lot more.
They kind of stripped her.
Yeah, she was making a terrified kid. In the comics, she's kind of spunky and adventurous, and it's okay with me because in the comics when she first shows up, she's already kind of got a handle on her powers. This is her still trying to figure it out, and she's getting lost.
Well, the problem with American Chavez in the Doctor Strange movie, I actually think that they stripped her of everything and left the bare bones to be like, yeah, this is American Chavez. But they used her entirely as a plot device.
That is correct. That was my problem with it, too.
That's the worst way to use a character.
That was my problem with it, too. And they do a really poor job of giving her development.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the Miss Marvel TV series, which was an adaptation of one of my favorite characters, which is Kamala Khan. I really enjoy Kamala Khan. She's a super fan in the Marvel Universe. She goes to all the Comic-Con. She goes to all the... She is a huge fan of superheroes. And when she becomes one, every time she teams up with one, she fangirls. She's like, oh my gosh, you're Captain America! And she's just... But she's competent. Her fandom doesn't get in her way of her doing her thing. Mm-hmm. She can be a little silly and goof off a little bit, but when it's time to be serious, she does her best. And she's a really fun character, and I enjoy her. And they did a pretty decent job of giving that to the screen in that one. Not a perfect one, but not bad. And there's some of the new characters I really enjoyed are Miles. I really love Miles Morales and America Chavez, and I just said her name. But Kamala Khan are three of my favorites of the newer generation of characters that have been coming out over the years. I really like those three. And there's a lot of great potential, a lot of great done with them and for film. And I'm really excited to see if they use some of those characters in film, because they're not as obscure. They're popular now, but they were obscure when they came out. And more characters like Moon Knight. They did Moon Knight, which is one of my brother's favorite characters. He loves Moon Knight. I understand him. He's basically like Batman, but he's a schizophrenic Batman. There's these really interesting, unique, soft characters that are just in Marvel that they did Jessica Jones in the Purple Man. They did a really good job. They adapted that comic like shot for shot almost.
Yeah.
In the first season.
Yeah.
But they didn't know what to do with it after that, because that was all of her character, and everything that she experiences after that is her like marrying Luke Cage and having kids and actually being a mom and a family person. And they're just like kept using her. Marvel is really good at taking obscure characters and making them interesting like once, and then they don't know what to do with them after that.
Yeah. And so I think that moving into DC, how it's failing, Marvel is able to take these obscure characters and make them into superstars. Yes. They do a really good job of that. They have a wide enough and a broad enough universe and things like that.
They took Shang-Chi and turned him into... That was an amazing film. I love Shang-Chi.
Yeah, it's a very good film. It was a very entertaining film. Don't get me wrong. I liked it. Not the best one, but it's good.
But I really enjoy it.
Of the obscure characters that they brought in, I think Guardians of the Galaxy just knocks it out of the park.
Guardians of the Galaxy does an amazing job, and and they've 3 in a row have just slam dunked it.
Yeah, it's a great series. For
DC, what is
moving into DC? Some of the things that I think. So here's some of my thoughts. I'm way more of a DC guy. I'm a DC nut. Love DC Comics.
Whereas I'm definitely a Marvel nut. I have a visceral I have a very Wikipedia understanding of DC and an intricate, intimate understanding of Marvel.
Yeah. Whereas I'm kind of the complete opposite.
Right.
I love Spider-Man. I read Spider-Man comics and stuff like that.
And I really like Batman. Yeah. Batman is definitely my favorite of DC. So I do, my secondary to him is Shazam. I've always liked Shazam just because it's a teenage kid being a superhero and like kind of fooling everybody. It's just kind of hilarious.
It's a fun story idea. Concept. It's a fun concept.
As long as it's not the one where it's all of them merging together into one person.
That one's just weird.
That one's weird. But,
but anyway, so I think that like MCU is really great about taking these obscure characters, and not only that, it's the broadness of their universe. They really take advantage of the broadness of their universe and bring it all together and stuff like that. DCU can't do that. A lot of people
not in live action film. They do a really good job of it in animation.
Oh, they're animated.
The animated
film series is some of like
Flashpoint, amazing. New Justice League,
the Batman Son vs. Batman Robin series. Yeah,
those are just amazing.
Their animated stuff is absolutely
the new 52 animated series films has done a really good job of captivating the new 52 universe, which is where I'm more. I have way more understanding of New 52 than anything else because I'm a more recent fan to DC.
Yeah,
but and the DC animated universe from the cartoon days on Fox, I think it was, or whoever it was at the time,
WB, Kids WB.
Yeah, back in the 90s and early 2000s, I think it was, or whatever. It was Batman the Animated Series, and there was the New Adventures of Batman and Robin, Batman and Superman Adventures, and then Justice League Unlimited, Static Shock, Batman Beyond. Mm-hmm. That entire animated universe is gold, and I've watched the entire thing more recently. Got to Young Justice.
Yep,
is really good.
Young Justice is amazing.
Young Justice is amazing, and it touches on some characters that don't get a lot of screen time, like Blue Beetle and a few others that don't get as much screen time as some of these other characters do. But in film, it falls apart. Why?
Okay, so there's a couple of reasons for this. One of the biggest issues recently is DC is trying to mimic MCU's model. You can't do that with DC. DC has team-ups. They have all these different unique team-ups and things like that. But to fight against the Avengers, like in the film and stuff like that, you can't lean into the Avengers. There are a lot of really great team-ups that make sense in the DC universe.
Yes.
That would be a lot more interesting and a lot more entertaining. But the thing is that it also depends on where they are, because DC is so dependent on the environment that the person is in, their rogues gallery, the backstory, the origins, and things like that.
In fact, the characters that work better for the team-ups are the ones that have the less backstory and story-driven narratives, like Stargirl or Mr. Terrific. And they work in the Justice League because they don't have a lot of individual established city and things they do. They're often like side characters in other stories, work great in the Justice League scenarios, whereas like Flash and
the Trinity, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman,
Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern. Those ones don't often struggle more in the team ups or even some of the individual films because their uniqueness is to their environment and stuff. You don't get that right.
Yeah, like Green Lantern
film fell apart.
Yeah, Green Lantern's great, but Green Lantern, you kind of have to have him as part of the core.
That's correct.
That's the only way that you can really get him to work. Like, he works well in the Justice League and stuff like that, but
there's also multiple humans that have it, even at the same time. At
There's
one
like
point in the comics, you have 4 or 5 at the same time.
Yeah.
You know,
and they're all unique. They're all different. They all have their different backstories.
Hal Jordan
and
is
stuff
very
like
different from
Guy Gardner.
Guy Gardner. My gosh, one of my favorite scenes from Young Justice is like, what about there's another Green Lantern? What about Guy Gardner? No. Like instantly, the other 2 Green Lanterns are like, no. But that one from the animated universe was unique.
John Stewart?
John Stewart was original to the animated series. I love him as Green Lantern.
He was
Great
a great
Green Lantern.
Yep.
And him and Hal Jordan actually get some moments where they get put together in different stories. And it's really fun seeing those two. Because Hal Jordan is like the ultimate every super good man.
Yeah, he's literally like Mr. America.
Yes.
Like he exudes
he's
American
he's a little
individualism.
too like on the nose. Whereas
He's literally like a paladin.
Whereas John Stewart is still a really good guy, but he's more human. Like he has real human problems and issues and stuff, and deals with things, especially with his relationship with Hot Girl and what's her face, who changes into the animals.
Changes into the animals.
Vixen. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
There's like these dynamics between these characters that are interesting. So much of this could be done on film, and they just don't do it.
Well, and the thing too is that because they want to fight MCU with their big guns. And the thing is that DC doesn't like. So DC's trying to fight Marvel, who's taking these really obscure characters and things like that, making unique and interesting storylines by heavy-handing and being like, oh, you're going to drop the Avengers? Well, guess what, guys? We have the Justice League.
Well, you know what my favorite films were of the DC universe? The obscure characters ones.
Yeah.
Shazam. I
Shazam
loved
was
it.
great.
Aquaman. I loved Aquaman. Yeah. I love that film. It's over the top, and it knows exactly what it is, and it's fine with it.
Yep.
I really enjoy, and I'm really looking forward to Blue Beetle. Like, these are characters. I know that's the other problem too, and I guess we can kind of close on that. Like, they blew up the freaking DC universe. What the heck is happening? Like,
okay, so that's the other thing too.
Is Blue Beetle happening? Like, is that the new universe? Is that happening in this one? Like, what's going on?
So that's something that really frustrates me. The Snyderverse and stuff like that is coming to like a close, and it's not coming to a close in a nice, smooth, decent way. They literally are blowing up the bridge before the train is even all the way down the railroad, all the way down it. I don't understand so why badly they executed.
Did this.
Well,
maybe because they thought it was doing poorly, but here's the thing: it's only doing poorly because you blew it up.
No, I know why. DC Comics is not Batman only. Okay? Hear me out. Batman has a very, very specific kind of style. He is a gothic, dark, grimy,
he's almost horror hero. As a supervillain, as a superhero.
He makes a lot of sense in Snyder's vision. Zack Snyder has a very, very specific artistic style. We've seen Sucker Punch. You know, Sucker Punch looks almost the exact same as Sin City, looks almost the exact same as 300, looks almost the exact same as the Justice League. Zack Snyder has a very specific art style. It would lean very, very well into properties like Batman, Constantine, the Dark Justice League, Justice League Dark.
Jonah Hex.
He's these darker, more grimy, like on the ground heroes and things like that. The biggest issue people
CW's version of the Arrow.
Yeah, CW's version of the Arrow. That's another great one. Zack Snyder's art style does not work with Superman. This is the biggest issue people have with that film. Superman is supposed to be bright, neon, optimism, amazing. Everything is great.
So I actually really enjoyed that film because it was a different take on Superman.
Don't get me wrong. It has its great parts.
But you're right. I kind of see that that is almost like an alternate version of Superman than it would be in the Justice League Superman.
Yeah.
That Superman is a lot darker than we're used to, which I enjoyed the film.
Don't get me wrong.
Greatly.
It's a great standalone film, and that's another point I'll get to. It's a great standalone film.
It doesn't work well in the universe. You're right.
No, it doesn't. And the thing is that Zack Snyder has a very specific vision and a very specific style. It is so singular though in its execution. Nobody can pick it up and do anything with it.
And that makes sense why they have to reboot all the other characters, because they have to get rid of. Yeah, they had all these other films that were good, but if they want to make the Justice League work right, they have to redo the whole thing.
Well, think about the greatest films that came out from DC. Wonder Woman, completely different artistic direction, completely different cinematography, completely different director and writer.
Aquaman and Shazam. They're very different films, and I love all three of those films.
And think about them.
Wonder Woman was amazing. I loved World War I. That was cool.
That was amazing. Like, I love the Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman was fantastic. Aquaman was fantastic. Shazam was fantastic. I liked the second. People panned it really bad. The second Wonder Woman film, but I actually really enjoyed it.
I liked it a little bit. I did not like Cheetah. Cheetah
wasn't actually my worst part of that film. Was actually the way that she just kind of the way the wishing thing worked.
Yeah,
there was no. Really, they didn't make it clear how that worked, but otherwise, like her character and her development, I was fine with all that.
It's not compared to the first one. It's very, very much a disappointment. But anyway, so the thing is though that the films that worked super duper well in the DCEU are not Zack Snyder films. Some of them are good. Like, don't get me wrong, Man of Steel is a very good film,
which is why I don't think you blow up the universe. You just get a different person. Direct the group films and it's fine.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. But the thing is that because he had so much control,
the Snyder cut was more popular than of the Justice League
because it was started with his style. He got fired halfway through.
He did. The Justice League film was a mess because of reshoots and all that stuff.
But the thing is that the reason the Snyder cut is so much better is because literally he was the one that had the artistic design to put it together in the first place. It is designed in a Zack Snyder way to fit Zack Snyder's style.
I had a lot of issues with Batman vs Superman.
Batman vs Superman is entirely Zack Snyder.
Yeah, but the extended version of it is actually better. It gives more reason for the characters to do what they're doing, but it still is weird.
It's a weird thing, and the thing is, it's a Zack Snyder.
It is
way,
but that's the other thing.
Zack Snyder is. Don't get me wrong. Like, I like Zack Snyder and things like that, but he needs
think it's entirely his fault.
So long.
That's true.
He needs so long to develop his stuff.
But the problem is they rushed into the Justice League.
Yes, they did.
They went. Superman, Batman vs Superman, Justice League.
And the thing is that Batman vs Superman
everyone got their standalone films after the fact.
Well, and the other thing too is that
Wonder Woman's film came after Batman vs Superman. Justice League is then followed by Aquaman and Shazam and all the other characters get their standalone films after the fact.
Well, and the thing
they
too
rushed
is
these characters together. They didn't do freaking. Still mad they didn't give enough justice to Cyborg. He got gypped in that movie.
Cyborg really deserved more. But okay, so here's the thing: they knee-jerked into trying to compete directly with the MCU instead of just saying, "This is our own stuff. We have our own stories. We have these and we have that." They tried to jump very, very far. And the thing is that Batman vs Superman is a terrible, terrible film. I've seen both cuts. Yes, the longer one is better than the short one. It's still a terrible film. And this is why. You are trying to introduce the Justice League and the Trinity specifically. And you're trying to do it in less than 4 hours. And the thing is, the characters you were trying to introduce do not fit, and the two comic book stories that he's trying to use as source material do not work to establish the Justice League.
No, those are actually the Batman vs Superman was an extreme emotional moment because those characters already knew each other when that happened. It's not a great way to start them off. And the Justice League shoving them all together with the mother boxes and stuff is like...
It doesn't make sense. It's too jumpy.
It is too jumpy,
and the thing is that
going straight to Darkseid and not even showing Darkseid in the film, and doing Steppenwolf instead, which is a pretty mainline villain under him, but these are obscure characters even by DC standards. These are ones that Jack Kirby created out of a whim. Like the New Gods is a wild story arc.
Well, Justice League
is the only the world of Apocalypse and Darkseid as a villain is the only things that survive that whole storyline in mainline comics.
But okay, so going back to my point though. Okay, so you're taking the death of Superman, an amazing storyline, amazing story arc, super impactful, very very hard driven. Singularly a Superman story, and you are combining it with The Dark Knight Returns. The Dark Knight Returns is a Batman story. It is a singularly Batman story that Superman appears in. Superman appears in The Dark Knight Returns to fight Batman. And you just took that aspect. If I just said, oh, in The Return of the Dark Knight, Batman fights Superman. It's one of the greatest, most epic battles in comic books. Of course, you'd be like, okay, I want Batman to fight Superman. We're going to put that on film. That's a great idea.
Oh, gosh, I love it.
But the problem is that the Dark Knight Returns, the fight works because Batman and Superman have a 30 to 50 year relationship.
Correct. And they just try to establish this on a whim.
Yeah, it's and it doesn't work.
They're doing Flashpoint the film and blowing up the whole universe, which is actually a pretty clever way of doing it.
Yeah,
that's the exact same thing they did in the CW series. They did Flashpoint and like, oh, we don't like the way characters are. Let's just reset everything.
And it just doesn't work. And
it works. You can only do it once. That's the thing. You can only do Flashpoint once. Once you do Flashpoint, you don't get to reset your universe with Flash again because it's not interesting anymore.
Yeah.
So they've done it once in the CW. They did it once in the comics to get the New 52.
Yep.
They did it in the CW verse to reset the CW verse. They got one more, and they do the Crisis on Infinite. You have two. You have two stories that reset everything: Flashpoint and Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Actually, technically, you have like 4.
Okay.
But we don't talk about the most recent 2. We don't talk about Heroes in Crisis because that is a garbage story written by a garbage writer by the name of Tom King, and I will rant for hours on how much I hate that man. But anyway, the other one is called Convergence.
Yeah,
Convergence was a lie. I was a huge comic nerd. Convergence was a lie. They introduced all these like old story arcs and stuff like that from the beginning of the New 52, and they made it sound like they were going to fight to the death, and whichever ones were more popular were going to find their way reintroduced into the new DC universe. That did not happen. Nothing happened from Convergence. Convergence ended, and nothing changed. They relaunched the entire universe, but it's entirely based off of storylines that were not finished, only in the New 52.
I will say
that is my nerd rant. I did that as fast as I could.
Marvel did the exact same thing with they did a Crisis on Infinite Earths things with the Beyonders crashing Marvel universes into each other. And that's how the Ultimate Universe was struggling because the Ultimate Universe was doing more popular than the original universe.
Ultimate Universe was awesome. Early 2000s Marvel, the Ultimate Universe.
Yeah.
I liked those comics.
Yeah, but that's what they did is they slammed it into the mainline community, took all the favorite characters from them and the more successful stories like Miles Morales and some of the others and brought them into the mainline universe so that they could have them interact with other characters normally, which was actually a really clever way to do it.
Yeah. Anyway, We'll wrap this up. We're going to continue the conversation. We're going to have a part 2 to this, just so that we don't have another like super duper long video. But to wrap up our idea on what works, what doesn't work in Marvel DC Universe, we've really kind of established what works in the DC or the Marvel Universe. Here's how I would fix the DC Universe. We will go into more depth about this. Like I have like specific plans and things like that I would do. But some of the things that I think really why the DCEU failed is you have these amazing and great stories, but the amazing and great stories you have to develop and you have to have time to let them air out.
They tried to pluck the characters and drop them.
And a lot of the stuff that they're trying to do is dependent on the relationship that the characters developed over years.
Yes.
And the thing is that the Justice League makes sense in war, but the thing is you have to write war as a separate thing. They could have introduced the Justice League just by doing that, just by having Justice League War. like they did in the DC universe,
which is kind of what they tried to do with Justice League, but they chose Steppenwolf and the Mother Boxes as the villain rather than Darkseid showing up and blowing everything to heck.
Which Darkseid is such a like he's more iconic, he's more well known, and he's a great villain. They could have just done that if they really wanted to. Him showing up
makes a lot more sense to get them together. Steppenwolf is not enough of a threat to get them all together. Except for they had to kill Superman off first to make it worse. If Superman was alive, they would have just killed Steppenwolf.
Yeah,
but
anyway,
they had to take care of Superman.
Yeah, so some of the things that, like, the DCEU is an absolute mess. Part of it is because they try to copy the MCU too much. DC is very, very story driven.
Yes,
DC has a lot more memorable, amazing stories. Like
the stories are as much of the character as the character. You can't just take Batman, drop him into a film, and make him fight anyone. He has specific stories that are iconic.
Yeah, and they're really great. And the thing is that you have to develop enough time and you have to let them breathe in order for them to have the maximum amount of impact for them to do things. Like, for instance, think about... It's a great comic. Batman, A Death in the Family.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's an amazing comic. It's a really great comic. It does not have the amount of impact that it should have if you don't have Batman's relationship with Dick Grayson than Batman's relationship with Jason Todd. Jason Todd, like, if you read A Death in the Family, the actual graphic novel comic, the actual death of Robin, that comic is like third to last in the entire collected comic.
It gives you
it gives you like 10 comics before that to establish everything, to at least get you to feel more of the impact and stuff like that. You can't put that on film. But if you mention Jason Todd at all in the universe, people want that movie. When they showed the Robin suit for Batman versus Superman, and it was like, ha ha ha, joke's on you, I really kind of looked at that and I was like, if you're going to do that, you should have had A Death in the Family. That's how you should have introduced
Killing
Batman.
Joke is another good example of that.
Killing Joke's great. Yeah.
Killing Joke is a story-driven narrative, and it only works because these characters are involved in the way that they are. You can't just do the Killing Joke in abstract. You can't just take Superman and drop him into the Killing Joke. It won't work the same. These characters have a history and a dynamic that works because of the way they are.
Yeah.
Like a character that always had a limit took it too far one time.
Yeah.
Joker always had a line he wouldn't cross, and he crosses the line, and now Batman's forced to readjust.
Yeah, it's
you only know
the
that
entire point of that story is anything can happen to somebody because of one bad day.
Yes.
That's the entire point of that story. Great story. But the thing is that you need to have developed the relationship between Batman and Joker, Commissioner Gordon, Batman and Barbara Gordon. Like, you have to have established characters that already have these things. They work really well if you just ignore that, and like the DC animated universe, I think, leans into the fact that they're like, oh, well, like, you should have read the comics to know the characters and stuff like that. But anyway,
that's another big issue that I have. If you have to read or understand the comics to get a film adaptation or a TV adaptation of something, you didn't do your job right.
Yeah.
The adaptation should stand on its own. You shouldn't have to know the source material to get it or to understand it. Marvel does that right.
Yeah.
DC pretty much force you. Plenty of people I knew were not very aware of these characters, didn't understand those films because they didn't understand the backstory into this. But if you know the comics and stuff, you can get a little bit more out of it, and they still ruined it, even if you knew it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, is that they picked really obscure and weird ways in order to introduce these characters in order to try to compete with the MCU directly. Just doesn't work. The way that they introduced the Justice League doesn't work, because the way that they introduced their main characters doesn't really work. You can't take MCU model, throw it in, and be like, this is how the DCEU is going to work. You just can't. And the other thing is that you can't try to force the thing to go the way that's going to go. Justice League has to come about either naturally or it has to be the first thing. In my opinion. It has to be either the first thing that comes out, and then we establish the characters afterwards, or you have to introduce all the characters individually and literally plan for like 10 years down the road having a Justice League movie.
Which is kind of what they did with... And Marvel still played it fairly safe. They took like 5 years to... Or it was
2008 to 2012, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, 2012 was when... Yeah, 2012 was when Avengers came out. So it gave 4 years before they did an Avengers film.
Yeah.
They established these characters really strongly. Gave them their own... Iron Man had 2 solo films. Captain America had
a solo film.
Thor had a solo film. You had it's like all the only ones that didn't were Hawkeye and Black Widow, but they showed up strongly in other films. Black Widow had showed up in both Iron Man films.
Mm-hmm. Well, she showed up in the second one.
The second one. Sorry, you're right. Not the first one. The second one. Yeah. She shows up in the second Iron Man film. And Captain America establishes him and his character really well in that film, so you know what's coming. Thor introduces Hawkeye a little bit. You just like it's a cameo, but you get it.
And the thing too is that when the MCU did it, they did it to introduce the actual character. It's a standalone adventure that's entirely featuring that one character.
Yes.
If you're going to introduce so Superman, the Man of Steel works really, really well because it wasn't intended to introduce an entire universe. It wasn't introduced to fight the MCU. It was supposed to be just a relaunch of the Superman franchise with its own amount of Superman films that come after. They introduced Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, all together. Batman versus Superman. Doesn't make any sense. It is too crammed. There are too many plot points. They don't work together.
They rushed the crap out of it. That's still my problem with it. They rushed it.
And the thing is that they rushed it so much, and they introduced these three main characters that when you get into Justice League, half of the team has not been introduced.
Yep.
And half of that team has really great stories.
Marvel had 4 of their 6 characters introduced by the time of the film.
Exactly.
If actually, that's not true. They had all 6 introduced, but they had 4 had their own films, and the other 2 were prominent in, or at least cameoed in other films.
Yeah, and the thing that, to go back to DC's issue, is the fact that Justice League, the reason that you tied in the Justice League to begin with was because people wanted to have their favorite superheroes interact with their other favorite superheroes. Not a single one of those superheroes is a background character. Not a single one of those does not deserve their own film.
That is entirely true. Well, I would argue that the only character really in MCU in the original Avengers that didn't really need their own film was Hawkeye, because his history really isn't that.
Well, or Black Widow, like they did it well. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the Black Widow film. I think that she deserved to have her own films and things like that. She's an interesting character, but to make the Avengers work, you don't need to introduce.
Because they're both
Black
agents
Widow
of S.H.I.E.L.D. In the comics, they are too. Both Hawkeye and Black Widow are S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and so they're under Fury. So it makes sense for them to just he put them in the Avengers to keep the other ones in check. That was his plans. Hey, you two are going to be on this team to keep this. The only actually thing that I kind of frustrated with a little bit is that Ant-Man and Wasp were founding members of the Avengers, and they didn't get to be in the MCU. But it's fine. But like Iron Man gets his own film. Captain America gets his own film. Hulk gets his own film. Thor gets his own film, and even a few of them some sequels. So they establish those characters and put the other ones in those films as well. By the time you get to the Avengers, you know these characters well.
And the thing is that they're the characters that you need to know. They're the big.
Is it
they're
5?
The big hands.
It's 5. Like Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, right? Yeah. And then Black Widow and
Hawkeye. Yeah.
They do a great job of establishing them all. And
and the thing is that they hinted at all these
frustrated me when I got to DC, and it's just I don't know who half of these. I mean, I do know who they're supposed to be, but I don't know who the film version of these characters are.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like I said, like the problem with Justice League is that they're all big named heroes. The point of the Justice League was the big named heroes get together and they do different things. The Avengers is a team. Like the concept of the Avengers is it's just a team. They have multiple people that can be in the film.
Whatever, it would kind of go over, but I was gonna say if you took the Flash film and the Wonder Woman film and the Aquaman film came before the Justice League, the only character now you have to introduce
is Cyborg,
and he
could literally make him the plot device.
Yes, with the mother boxes, that now makes sense because he's the only character you're introducing because he has a mother box built into him. That's part of his character. And you can expand upon that because you're not also trying to introduce all the other characters at the same time.
Yeah, but DCEU completely failed too because the thing is that DC is an individualistic story. DC works best when the heroes are doing their own thing and they're not interacting with other heroes. That's where all the great comic stories that DC has not usually team ups. They have some great teams. Don't get me wrong.
Whereas Marvel's the opposite. Some of the greatest comics in
all of the greatest comics, except for Spider-Man ones,
like
are the team-ups,
like Battle World where they go and they get dropped. The Beyonder drops them on a planet for them to kill each other.
Yeah, or like, Secret Wars.
Secret Wars. I think
Age of Ultron.
The invasion of these team up battles are so interesting because the characters mashing off each other is what's fun in Marvel. It works so well.
But the thing is that you don't really have that in DC. Like, DC, when they do team-ups and stuff like that, it's usually for, like, a really big threat and stuff like that. And the thing is, you have to establish the big threat, and you have to hint at the big threat. Like, they hinted at Thanos for years before he showed up. But anyway, like, DC they rushed everything. They tried to be too much like Marvel, and they didn't lean into what makes DC Comics great. DC Comics, in my opinion, make better comics when they are story-driven, individual, and lean into how great
and the films follow. Some of the, like we talked about, the best Batman films are ones that stand alone with him facing his threats. The Dark Knight series, the 1980s Batman.
Yeah. So that's really kind of the thing. We are a little bit over the time that we were going to shoot for. We're going to do a part 2 on this just because we have a lot of really good stuff to continue talking about, I think, when it comes to comic books and movies. We can get more into the technical details of like carrying things over and stuff like that. I have a lot of ideas on how I would have fixed the DCEU specifically, maybe some issues we have with the MCU. We can talk about that in the next podcast.
We could also talk about some of the other comic properties out there that have been done to films too, because there's a lot. You have things like Hellboy, Spawn, stuff like that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So there's Iconic and stuff like that. So there are other things that really need to be aired out as well.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's plan for our next episode to be on, let's focus on the DCEU, how we would fix it, and then talk about other comic book properties, why they work, why they don't work.
Okay.
Let's plan for that next time. Thank you guys so much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this podcast. If you are interested in having us talk about a different topic, let us know. What are your thoughts about the MCU? Why does it work? And the DCEU, why didn't it work? What are your favorite moments from comic book movies? And why do you think that they work so well? And until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video.
Thanks for listening.